In the quiet town of Mbale, the morning sun always rose over the red clay roofs, lighting up the narrow paths where children ran to school with laughter and noise. But among them walked one girl who never joined in the laughter. Her name was Ifeoma. Every day she walked quietly, holding her books close to her chest, her face covered by a piece of brown carton. The carton had two small holes cut around the eyes so she could see the road ahead, but it hid everything else: her nose, her mouth, and the face behind it. The other children called her names as she passed. "Carton girl," they shouted. "Why are you hiding? Are you a ghost?" Their laughter followed her all the way to school. Ifeoma never replied. She kept walking, her small sandals kicking up dust, pretending not to hear. She had learned long ago that silence was safer than words. In class, she sat at the corner near the window, far from the others. When the teacher called her name, her voice was soft, almost like a whisper. Madame Ezen, the teacher, often watched her with pity. One afternoon after class, when all the other pupils had left, she called her gently. "Ifeoma," she said softly, "come here, my dear." Ifeoma stood still for a moment before walking slowly to the teacher's desk. Her carton mask rustled lightly as she moved. "Why do you hide your face?" Madame Ezen asked kindly. "You are a bright girl. You should not be afraid to show yourself." For a while Ifeoma said nothing. Her small hands twisted the edge of her exercise book. Then she whispered, "Because people can't laugh at what they can't see." The teacher felt her heart grow heavy. She wanted to ask more, but she saw the fear in the girl's eyes, fear that came from somewhere deep and old. So she only nodded and said, "All right, my child. But remember, sometimes hiding only makes people wonder more." When Ifeoma left the classroom, she walked home through the dusty path that led to the end of the town, where the houses were small and quiet. Her home was a tiny clay hut with a rusted tin roof. Smoke from the kitchen drifted into the air. Her father, Papa Tund, was sitting outside sharpening his machete. When he saw her, he smiled. "My daughter," he said, "you are home." Ifeoma nodded and sat beside him. He looked at the carton on her face but said nothing. He had grown used to it, though every time he saw it, it reminded him of pain, pain that once almost took his child away. Years ago, when Ifeoma was just a baby, their kitchen had caught fire. Her mother had been cooking yam when the oil spilled and spread the flames. She tried to save her baby first, wrapping her in cloth, but the smoke was thick and the fire was faster. Though she managed to get Ifeoma out, she never came out herself. Ifeoma survived, but her face bore the marks of that day, scars that twisted her skin, reminders of both pain and survival. When she grew old enough to go to school, the other children pointed and laughed. They called her names, said she looked like a monster. Some even ran from her. One day she came home crying and begged her father, "Papa, I don't want to go anymore." Her father's heart broke, but he could not let her give up. The next morning she appeared from her room wearing a piece of carton over her face. "Now they won't laugh," she said quietly. From that day the carton became her protection, her shield against the world. Every morning she would wash her face carefully, tie the carton behind her head and walk to school. Even when the sun burned hot, she never took it off. Some people in the village began to make up stories about her. "She is cursed," one woman said at the market. "Her mother's spirit follows her," another added. "I heard she has no face," a child whispered. Ifeoma heard the whispers even when people thought she didn't. At first she tried to ignore them, but sometimes when she was alone at night, she would look in the mirror and touch her face gently. The scars were real, rough, uneven, but also a part of her. She didn't hate her face. What she hated was how others made her feel because of it. One afternoon at school it rained heavily. The roof leaked and the wind blew hard. As the children ran home, a boy named Chijioke bumped into her and the edge of the carton tore. For the first time a small part of her cheek was visible. He gasped but didn't laugh. He simply said, "Sorry, I didn't mean to." Ifeoma ran home quickly, holding the torn carton to her face. That night as she fixed it with tape, she thought about that boy, the way he looked surprised but not cruel. She wondered if maybe not everyone would laugh if they saw her. But fear stopped her from finding out. Still, every day she dreamed. She loved to draw, pictures of people, animals, and skies. Sometimes she drew girls with happy faces and clean skin. Other times she drew herself but without the carton. She kept those drawings hidden under her pillow. Her father often sat beside her and said, "You are strong, my daughter. Your mother would be proud." And though she smiled behind the carton, her heart always whispered, "I wish the world could see me the way you do, Papa." The days in Bale passed slowly, school, chores, laughter from others, silence from her. Ifeoma lived between fear and courage, wanting to be seen but terrified of being mocked again. She carried her secret carefully, like a fragile pot that could break if touched too roughly. Only she and her father knew the truth about the scars behind the carton, a truth born from fire but protected by love. The rest of the world saw only what they chose to see, a strange, quiet girl who hid her face. But life in Bale was about to change for her. Something was coming, something that would make her finally face the world not with fear, but with the strength she never knew she had. Ifeoma lived with her father, Papa Tund, in a small clay house at the very edge of Mbale. The roof was patched with old metal sheets, and when it rained, the sound of water tapping on the roof was louder than their voices. Their yard was surrounded by tall grass, and behind their house stood the remains of what used to be their kitchen, now only blackened walls and ashes, a painful reminder of the day everything changed. Papa Tund was a quiet man. Every morning, he left for the sawmill before the sun rose, carrying his lunch wrapped in a small cloth. He worked hard, his hands always smelling of wood and sweat. But no matter how tired he was when he returned at night, he always brought something small for Ifeoma, a piece of bread, a new pencil, or sometimes just a smile. She was all he had left after the fire. When Ifeoma was just a baby, the fire had started suddenly. Her mother had been cooking yam in palm oil when the pot fell, and flames spread across the small kitchen. Neighbors said her mother screamed for help, but by the time they got there, the fire had eaten through the walls. Her mother's last act was saving her daughter, wrapping her in wet cloth and pushing her outside through the window. The villagers found the baby alive, but her mother never made it out. The fire left deep scars across Ifeoma's face, marks that twisted her smooth skin and ran down to her neck. As she grew older, people stopped calling her beautiful. Instead, they called her cursed. Some said the fire had changed not just her skin but her destiny. She survived what no child should, the old women whispered in the market. But such things always come with a price. No one wanted their children near her. When she first went to school, some of the pupils screamed and ran. Others pointed and laughed. Even the teachers didn't know how to protect her. So she learned to protect herself. One morning, she cut a piece of old carton, made 2 holes for her eyes, and tied it around her head with string. The first day she wore it, the children laughed again, but less than before. And though their laughter still hurt, at least she didn't have to see their faces. The carton became her wall, her shield. Behind it, she could pretend she was invisible. She no longer had to see the pity in their eyes or the fear that sometimes flashed when strangers looked at her. Every day after school, she sat under the big mango tree near her house. There, she drew quietly with her small pencil on old notebooks. Drawing was the only time she felt free. She drew flowers, birds, houses, but most of all, she drew faces. Faces of girls who smiled without fear, faces that were unbroken. Then one day something changed. A new boy joined their school. His name was Chijiok. He was tall and quiet, with eyes that always seemed to be watching, learning. He didn't talk much, but he smiled easily, the kind of smile that didn't carry mockery or judgment. During break time, while everyone else played, Chijiok noticed a small figure sitting alone under the mango tree. Her face was covered with a piece of brown carton. Curious, he walked toward her. "What are you drawing?" he asked softly. Ifeoma froze. No one had ever approached her before, not like that. Most people stayed far away. She didn't answer. Chijiok waited, then sat down a few steps away, careful not to scare her. "I like to draw too," he said after a while. "But I'm not very good." Something in his voice made her glance up. He wasn't teasing. He really meant it. Slowly, she turned her notebook so he could see. On the paper was a picture of a girl with bright eyes and a big smile. Her hair was blowing in the wind and her face, her whole face, was showing. "It's you," Chijiok said after a long pause. Ifeoma's heart skipped. "No," she whispered behind the carton. "It's someone I wish I could be." Chijiok looked at her quietly for a moment, then smiled again. "Then she's already inside you. You just haven't seen her yet." For a moment, neither of them spoke. The wind rustled the mango leaves above, and the smell of ripening fruit filled the air. That afternoon, for the first time in a long while, Ifeoma didn't feel completely alone. When school ended, she walked home thinking about the boy's words. No one had ever spoken to her like that before, as if she was not strange but special. The next day, she sat under the tree again. She wasn't sure if Chijiok would come, but he did. He brought a small tin of colored pencils. "You can use these," he said shyly. "My sister had them, but she doesn't draw anymore." Ifeoma looked at the tin in surprise. "You're giving them to me?" He nodded. "Yes. But only if you promise to draw something for me." she tilted her head. What should I draw? He grinned. Surprise me. For the first time Ifeoma laughed, just a small laugh, light and quick, but it was real. From that day they became friends. They shared stories and drawings under the mango tree every afternoon. Chijioke never asked about her face, never tried to lift the carton, and never looked at her with pity. To him she was just Ifeoma, the girl who could draw anything she imagined. But word soon spread through the school. Other children began to whisper again. Why is he sitting with carton girl? They sneered. He'll become cursed too. Ifeoma heard them and waited for Chijioke to leave her, like everyone else had before. But he didn't. He just looked at them calmly and said, You all see a carton. I see an artist. His words silenced them for a moment, but their laughter returned later, sharper than before. Still, something had begun to change in Ifeoma. The more she drew, the less afraid she felt. Sometimes, when she was alone at home, she took off the carton and looked at herself in a small mirror. Her scars were still there, rough and uneven, but now when she looked, she saw strength too. One evening, as the sun dipped low, she showed her father one of her new drawings, a picture of two children sitting under a mango tree, laughing. Papa Tund looked at the picture for a long time. You've drawn yourself with a friend? He said softly. Ifeoma nodded. Yes, Papa. He doesn't laugh at me. Her father smiled, his eyes misty. Maybe, my child, he said, God has sent someone to remind you that you are more than what people see. That night, Ifeoma placed the carton beside her bed before sleeping. For the first time she didn't dream of hiding, she dreamed of colors, sunlight, and the face she had drawn smiling back at her. The next morning she picked up the carton, looked at it for a long time and whispered, Maybe one day I won't need you anymore. From that day onward, Chijioke and Ifeoma were almost never seen apart. Every morning he waited by the school gate holding 2 sticks of sugar cane. One was for him and one was for her. They would walk together through the laughter and whispers that followed, pretending not to hear. At first, the other pupils thought he was joking, that he was only spending time with her to make fun of her later. But as days turned into weeks, they realized he wasn't pretending. He truly enjoyed her company. He laughed at her jokes, helped her carry her books, and shared his lunch when she forgot hers. Chijioke has lost his mind, said one of the boys in class. Who would sit with a girl wearing a carton? Another added. Chijioke only smiled. I see more than a carton, he said calmly. I see courage. His words became something people repeated, sometimes to mock but sometimes to wonder. Madame Ezin, their teacher, began to notice how Ifeoma's eyes, the only part of her face that could be seen, started to shine again. Her shoulders were no longer always bent down in shame. She raised her hand more in class and even volunteered to read aloud. Though her voice still shook, it was growing stronger. Then one bright Monday morning the headmaster made an announcement. Children's Day is coming, he said. We will have a drawing competition. The best picture will hang in the town hall for everyone to see. The class buzzed with excitement. Everyone began talking about what they would draw: houses, rivers, farms, birds, and cars. Chijioke turned to Ifeoma. You have to enter, he said. You draw better than anyone here. Ifeoma shook her head quickly. No. They won't choose me. You know how people look at me. But this time, Chijioke replied softly, they will look at your drawing, not your face. Let them see your heart. That night Ifeoma couldn't sleep. She lay on her small mat, the moonlight falling through the window onto her old drawing books. Her father was snoring softly in the next room. She sat up, looked at her carton lying by her bedside and whispered, Let them see my heart. She began to draw. Her pencil moved slowly at first, then faster, guided by the feeling she had carried for years: pain, hope, courage, and love. She drew until the candle burned out. When morning came, her paper was full. She had drawn a girl standing in sunlight, her face scarred but smiling. The light around her was bright, and the shadow behind her looked like wings. At the bottom she wrote, We all have scars. Some just show on the outside. The day of the competition arrived, and the schoolyard was buzzing. Parents came from nearby villages. The air smelled of puff-puff and roasted corn. Tables were set up under big umbrellas with colorful papers, pencils, and brushes everywhere. Ifeoma stood far at the back, holding her drawing close to her chest. Her hands trembled. I shouldn't be here, she whispered. Chijioke came to stand beside her. He wore a clean white shirt and smiled. You're exactly where you should be, he said. Now go and show them. She nodded slowly, tightening the string of her carton mask. Even now she couldn't take it off. She wasn't ready, not yet. When it was her turn, the crowd went silent. A girl wearing a carton was walking toward the stage, carrying a paper in her hand. Some people laughed quietly, others whispered. "Who let her join?" one woman muttered. "That's the strange girl." Ifeoma climbed the small stage and placed her drawing on the easel. The judges, 3 teachers and the headmaster, looked at each other uncertainly. One of them cleared his throat. "Tell us what you've drawn, my child." Her voice shook. "I drew a girl," she said. "She was burned by fire, but she still stands in the light. People say she is ugly, but she still dreams. Her scars are not curses, they are stories." The crowd was quiet. For the first time no one laughed. Everyone stared at the picture, at the way the girl in the drawing seemed to glow with quiet strength. Chijioke's eyes filled with tears as he clapped softly. Others began to join. The sound spread, gentle at first, then louder, until the entire field echoed with applause. When the judges whispered among themselves, the headmaster stood and spoke. "Art is not about beauty of the face but beauty of the heart," he said. "This drawing shows both." The crowd cheered again, and for a moment, Ifeoma forgot about the carton. She smiled behind it, a real wide smile that reached her eyes. After the event, she walked home with Chijioke, her paper carefully tucked in her folder. The sun was setting, painting the sky in soft gold. "You did it," he said proudly. She nodded. "I just drew what I know," she said quietly. Pain but also hope. That night, when she got home, her father lifted her high into the air, laughing for the first time in months. "My daughter the artist," he said, his eyes shining. "You've made me proud." Ifeoma placed her winning paper on the wall beside her bed. She touched the words at the bottom and smiled. The next morning she wore her carton again, but this time not to hide, but to walk proudly through the village as the girl who had won with her heart, not her face. And though she still couldn't take it off, something inside her had already begun to change. When the judges lifted Ifeoma's artwork high for everyone to see, a deep hush fell over the crowd. The drawing caught the sunlight and the colors seemed to dance. It wasn't just a picture, it was a story that everyone could feel in their hearts. The girl in the drawing stood proudly in the light, her scars glowing like gold. Even the wind grew quiet, as though it too wanted to listen. The headmaster adjusted his glasses and said in a voice full of pride, This is art from the soul. Ifeoma, come forward, child." For a moment she did not move. Her legs felt heavy. Her heart beat fast, like drums during a village festival. The whispers began. "Who is she?" someone asked. "The girl with the carton?" She made that. Then she felt a light tap on her shoulder. It was Chijioke. He smiled and said softly, "Go on. They're calling you." Ifeoma took a slow breath and walked toward the stage. Each step felt long and loud. Her carton mask trembled slightly as she held it in place. The people's eyes followed her. Some were curious, others doubtful. But everyone wanted to see her. When she reached the front, the headmaster smiled kindly and said, "You have a gift, my child. Your drawing touched us all." The crowd began to clap. But soon the clapping changed into soft murmurs. Someone in the crowd said, "Remove the carton. Let's see her face." Another voice added, "We want to see who drew this." Ifeoma froze. Her hands began to shake. She looked down at her feet. Her throat felt tight. The carton had been her safety for so long, her shield from the world. Without it she felt naked, exposed. The crowd waited. Some children giggled nervously. Others stared, unsure of what was happening. Then she heard a calm voice, Chijioke's voice, cutting through the noise. "Ifeoma," he said softly, "don't hide anymore. Let them see the real you." Their eyes met, and in that small look she found courage. Her fingers touched the string behind her head. She untied it slowly. Her heart thumped louder than the clapping. Then in one brave motion she took off the carton. A sharp silence filled the air. No one moved. The world seemed to pause. The sunlight fell directly on her face, the face that had once been hidden for years. The scars were deep, but they were not ugly. They told a story of fire and survival, of pain and strength. Her eyes, bright, steady, and full of life, shone even more than the sunlight. For a few long seconds no one spoke. The children who used to call her Carton Girl stood frozen, their mouths open. Some of the women covered their lips with their hands. The men looked down, ashamed of their past words. Then slowly Madame Ezen, her teacher, stepped forward. Her eyes were full of tears. She wrapped her arms around Ifeoma tightly and said, "You are beautiful, my child. Your face tells a story of strength, not shame." The words broke the silence. Applause began again, soft at first, then louder, rising like the sound of rain on rooftops. The children who had once mocked her started clapping too. One small girl came forward and said, "I want to be brave like her." Others nodded. Papa Tund, her father, stood at the edge of the crowd. Tears ran down his rough cheeks. He whispered, "That's my daughter. My strong, beautiful daughter." Chijioke stepped onto the stage and stood beside her. He didn't say anything. He just held her hand, letting the whole village see that he was proud to stand with her. The headmaster raised his hands and said, "Today we learned something special. True beauty is not in smooth skin or perfect faces. True beauty is in the courage to be seen." People began to cheer louder. Some even stood on benches to catch a better glimpse of her. Children danced and clapped their hands. Ifioma smiled, not the shy smile she used to hide, but a real, proud smile that came from deep inside. It was the kind of smile that healed old wounds. That moment changed everything. The carton that once made her feel safe now lay forgotten at her feet. It had served its purpose. She no longer needed it. After the celebration, as the sun began to set, she walked home with Chijioke and her father. The warm orange sky painted their path. Villagers waved to her as she passed. "Well done, Ifioma," they called. "You are brave." She smiled and waved back. For the first time she did not look down or hide. She walked tall, her scars glowing in the golden light. When they reached home, Papa Tund placed his hands on her shoulders and said, "You see, my child? The fire may have burned your face, but it could not burn your spirit." That night, Ifioma sat by her small window, holding the carton in her hands one last time. She touched it gently and whispered, "Thank you for hiding me, but now I am ready to be seen." She placed it beside her lamp, smiled to herself and looked out at the stars. For the first time in her life she felt truly free. From that day on, Ifioma never wore the carton again. The next morning when she walked to school the air felt different, lighter, kinder. The children who once laughed at her stopped and watched as she passed. No one shouted "Carton Girl" anymore. Some waved shyly, others whispered, "That's Ifioma, the brave one." She carried her books close to her chest, but this time her head was held high. The warm sun touched her face and for the first time she didn't hide from it. It felt like the world itself was welcoming her back. When she reached the school gate, Madame Ezen smiled and said, "Good morning, Ifioma the Brave." The name spread quickly. It followed her wherever she went. Students, teachers, even the headmaster began to call her that, not out of pity but with admiration. Life slowly began to change in Bale. Children learned from her story. When someone was different they no longer laughed or pointed. They remembered how they once hurt Ifioma, and they didn't want to make that mistake again. One afternoon during assembly the headmaster gathered everyone and said, "Let us learn from one of our own. Courage is not about fighting or shouting. It is about standing tall when the world tells you to hide. Ifioma has taught us that." The whole school clapped. Ifioma looked around and saw the faces of her classmates smiling, not at her but with her. It was a feeling she had never known before. At home, Papa Tun noticed the change too. Each evening, neighbors came by to greet them. "Your daughter is an inspiration," one woman said. "My little girl says she wants to be strong like her." Papa Tun's eyes glistened with pride. He had once feared that Ifioma's scars would make life harder for her. Now those same scars were lighting the way for others. Chijioke remained her closest friend. They still sat under the mango tree after school talking and laughing. He no longer saw her as the girl behind the carton. He saw her as the girl who had changed a whole town. One day as they sat drawing together he said, "Do you remember the first time I spoke to you? You were drawing a girl smiling." She nodded. "Yes. A girl who wasn't afraid." Chijioke smiled. "That girl was always you, Ifioma. You just didn't know it yet." Her heart filled with warmth. She realized that courage was not something that suddenly appeared. It had always been there, waiting for her to believe in it. Months passed and Ifioma began to teach younger children how to draw. She started a small art club at school, where anyone could come, even those who others thought were different. One of her students was a boy who had lost an eye in an accident. When he told her he was afraid to face people, she said gently, "Your story is part of who you are. Don't hide it. Let the world see your strength." The boy smiled for the first time in weeks. That was how Ifioma became more than just the brave girl. She became a teacher of courage and kindness. Even the adults in Bale began to change. They spoke differently, softer and more thoughtful. They told their children, "Never mock what you don't understand. Remember Ifioma, the girl who turned pain into pride." During the next Children's Day celebration, The headmaster asked her to give a short speech. Standing on the same stage where she had once removed her carton, she looked at the sea of faces before her, faces that once mocked her but now admired her. She took a deep breath and said, "When I used to hide behind a carton, I thought it protected me. But I learned something: hiding only makes the world smaller. When you step out and show who you really are, that is when the world grows. My scars are not my weakness. They are my story." Her words echoed through the hall. The audience stood and clapped loudly. Some teachers wiped their eyes. Papa Tun smiled proudly from the front row, his hands trembling as he clapped. Chijioke stood beside him, grinning from ear to ear. After the speech, children ran to hug her. "You are my hero, Ifeoma," one little girl shouted. Another said, "I want to be brave like you." That night, as she walked home, the stars shone brightly above. She looked up and smiled. The air smelled of rain and earth, clean, fresh, full of hope. When she reached home, her father was waiting by the door. He looked at her and said, "You have changed more hearts than you will ever know." Ifeoma laughed softly. "I just stopped hiding, Papa." He nodded. "And that was the bravest thing you could ever do." The carton she once wore still rested on the shelf beside her bed. She didn't throw it away. Sometimes she would look at it and remember how far she had come. It reminded her that even the things that once made her afraid were part of her journey. As the months turned into years, her story became one that parents told their children at bedtime. There was once a girl, they would say, who wore a carton to school every day to hide her face. But one day she took it off and the whole world saw how beautiful courage could be. Ifeoma grew into a confident young woman. She continued to draw, to teach, and to spread kindness. The children of Mbale no longer feared those who were different. They celebrated them. Whenever people saw her walking through the market, her head high and her smile warm, they greeted her with joy. "Good afternoon, Ifeoma the Brave," they would call. And she would wave back, her laughter ringing through the air. Sometimes she still met people who looked at her scars first before her smile. But she didn't mind anymore. She knew that her worth wasn't written on her skin, it lived in her heart. And whenever someone asked about her story, she would say gently, "Once, I hid my face from the world. But now, the world looks up to me, not because I am perfect but because I chose not to hide." Her courage became a light for others, a reminder that beauty is not in flawless faces but in fearless hearts. That was how the girl who once covered her face with a carton became the woman who taught her town to see beauty in every scar, and strength in every story.